Today we have a very special edition of the Indie Cafe 2 show, and maybe it's about a very special book that we're going to talk about, authored by a very special author, Anthony DeCurtis, with the book Lou Reed Alive. And on the show, we're going to have two special guests who are mentioned in the book, along with, by the way, myself and Judith, we designed with Sylvia a number of projects. Sylvia Reed and Richard Barone. And I'll go ahead by first telling you about each. Anthony DeCurtis. He was a Grammy Award winner for writing liner notes for Eric Clapton's Crossroads box set and is on the Rock Hall nominating committee for many years. Contributing editor to Rolling Stone, collaborated with Clive Davis' autobiography, The Soundtrack of My Life in 2013, a New York Times nonfiction bestseller. He was also in the film doc, Clive Davis' Soundtrack of Our Lives. He's the author of the book we're going to be talking about, Lou Reed Alive in 2017, judged multiple years for the Independent Music Awards, and was interviewed on major media in such places as MTV, VH1, Today Show, etc. He has much more in his resume, but it would take a whole show to talk about. The second person, another famous music personality, Richard Barone. We interviewed Richard Barone recently on his new release book, Music Plus Revolution. He gained attention as frontman for the Bongos, songwriter, arranger, record producer, director, author of Music Plus Revolution, created events for Carnegie Hall, Hollywood Bowl, New York City Central Park, serving on board of governors for the Recording Academy, Grammys, and board of advisors for the Anthology Film Archives, affiliated with Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music at NYU and New School for Jazz and Contemporary Music. He's creating a November 19th concert at Carnegie Hall for Music Cares and Art Preservation. The basis of the concert is his book, Music Plus Revolution, Greenwich Village in the 60s. I would advise everyone to get a ticket because there's going to be a laundry list of musicians playing that are unbelievable. Sylvia Reed, another very famous music guest, recently interviewed on our show, and that interview with two other interviews will be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame archival collection, which is a great honor. She's the second wife of Lou Reed and manager of Lou Reed for 18 years of music and artistic collaboration, what may be the most prolific period of his art and life. She was also Grammy nominated for music packaging for Songs for Drella with Tom Rashan. Judith and I have designed a number of Lou Reed and Velvet Underground projects with her, plus Peel Slowly and See box set for Polydor. Welcome to the show, and I want to first ask you, how did this book start and the concept of it?
Well, unfortunately, I mean, it had its start when Lou died. I was on WNYC, the NPR station here in New York, talking about Lou's life. And I'd written about him a lot, knew him a bit. And someone in the publishing industry heard about it, heard the interview that I did, contacted my agent, and we sort of went out with the idea of just to see if there would be interest, and there was a great deal of interest, I'm happy to say. And so, I felt like Lou was a good subject for me. Obviously, I've been a huge fan of his music for many, many years. And so there was that. I mean, at the time, I had a young daughter. She's older now, but I wanted to do a project that would keep me in New York. And obviously, Lou, of course, being so closely associated with New York, the vast majority of my research can be done from here. And I felt I would have something to say. I mean, there obviously had been other books about Lou. I wasn't really some are better than others. I felt that I could really contribute something different. Um, was I felt I could, well, I mean, in all modesty, I'd have a deeper take on him and his work. And it was a trick. It was a good deal of work. Um, working my way through all of Lou Reed's, music, and also the complexities of his personal life, finding some kind of through line that didn't really reduce him, but that provided context and depth to those aspects of his career was really the challenge of the book. And so it was a great, exciting project to embark on, and complete. I will say it was a great project to complete for sure.
Yeah, I wanted to just mention to the people that are watching a very short description. It is a book with unparalleled access to dozens of Lou Reed friends, family, and collaborators. Anthony DeCurtis tracks Reed's 5-decade career through the accounts of those who knew him and through Reed's most revealing testimony, his music.
Well, I'll accept that. Absolutely. I think, obviously, Sylvia was a great help. She did a very good interview for the book, as did Richard and many, many other people. Creating a texture with all those voices was exciting and a great, gave a great sense of possibility. There's anytime I think you're reading about an individual artist, there's a danger of it's becoming a little bit claustrophobic. But with all the various people who were involved with Lou, who spoke for the book, it gave it again a kind of texture and I would hope a depth that would reward the people who pick it up to read it.
Sylvia, the Songs for Drella era that's in the book, tell us a little about that area of Lou's life.
There are many people who, I think in Anthony's book and maybe other books, who will talk about what the origin of the idea was. But it was, I saw the project with such a clarity, like almost immediately upon the sad news of Andy's passing. I started to try to make this project clear to Lou, who originally had reasons he would be a little reluctant. But fortunately, with the help of John's wonderful wife, Risa Kale, who's still a good friend of mine, we, brought that special influence to bear that a wife can. And as a trusted manager in the case of Lou, he trusted me and understood I wouldn't bring it up if I didn't feel that it could be successful. And we caught them, I think, at the exact right. It was the context and the topic, for John and Lou to overcome. They just had a tendency to eventually grate on each other. Spencer, you were with me the night that the Apple event where they had the double feature, Songs for Drella and the Todd Haynes wonderful Velvet Underground documentary.
Right.
And it was an completely exciting moment because for me, it brought back the immediacy of that production and how really difficult it was. The tension involved in the preparation for the project, and then the magic of how great it was. The film brought all those memories back of just how talented and loving and yet a searing acknowledgement of who Andy was. Just incredible production. Very proud of having been part of the group of people who wanted this to happen and who helped it happen.
Anthony, you wrote another industry report. Judith and I worked with Sylvia on the New York album, and it was about the title New York. And I remember you write in the book, Faulkner had the South, Joyce had Dublin, I've got New York. I thought that was really a great one. And Sylvia, there's a story behind that, right? About the New York title.
Interesting aspect. One of the interesting aspects of my work with Lou was just how collaborative he was and how generous he was to appreciate when he heard something good, it hit him right away. And he appreciated it and wanted my input, particularly in terms of the content and the titles. So in this case, we had been speaking for a while about what was happening in the lyrics, what was being developed there. And when I was doing the interview for, I think with David Frick, for the booklet that was going to go with the box set, I mentioned that there were notes that I have in a notebook in Lou's hand, in which we're going back and forth, and he's writing different titles down, scratching them out and moving on. And I saw the evolution is there in the notebook, where I think at one point Lou was thinking, I'll call it New York Blues. And I said, no, let's call it New York. And then everyone who writes about it will have to refer to Lou Reed's New York. And the charming thing about him was he actually said that he felt that would be a little pretentious. And I said, no. Said maybe for any other artist it might be, but for you it is completely appropriate.
Is there any parts of the book you want to talk about that might have hit you? I mean, so much in it. I mean,
yeah, there was a lot. When I was giving, actively out there giving readings from the book, I used to like to read the section about Coney Island Baby and about, Lou's relationship with his transgender partner at the time, Rachel Humphreys. Because there was an incredible sort of emotionality to it. And it was tough to write about. The whole thing ended pretty sadly, and as did Rachel's life. And I felt it was something that I could, bring to, the audience, whoever would turn out, to hear me read and get a sense of what the book was like. It seemed to me to be, there was some, I think, fresh information in there, certainly from the level of interpreting that element of Lou's life. And I felt that like the depth of feeling both that was present, in the album and in the relationship. And, I have to say, I felt like by my own standard, captured that in my writing. That was something I always enjoyed putting out there in front of people to see what they would make of it, which was interesting in its own right.
How do you think Lou would, if he were alive, how would he rate your book? What would he think?
I don't think he would like it.
You don't think he'd like it?
I don't think he would have liked it.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff in there that I think Lou didn't like to talk about or really didn't like to think about. I think that a lot of Lou's hostility, we're getting into a psychological area here, and which I don't typically hesitate to do, but I feel that there were things about Lou's life that a lot of his hostility towards journalists was almost like he was anticipating being asked certain questions. And Lou was somebody who was always very interested in control. And there were periods of his life when he was wildly out of control. And, they're very well known. I didn't really have too many qualms of conscience writing about them because they're pretty much out there for everybody to see. But there was an element of Lou that I felt, wouldn't have wanted that. Out beyond that, I mean, much as I feel like Lou genuinely respected me and felt a good deal of affection toward me, I don't think I wouldn't have written the book while he was alive. It just would have been much of a problem. You know, I certainly would have been a problem with him, but then it would have been a problem with, I think, a lot of other people, you know, who, you know, I think Lou was not, I think Lou would have been likely to encourage people not to speak. Now, that would have worked to a limited degree because, you know, Lou had burned so many bridges that, you know, many people wouldn't have cared whether Lou wanted them to speak or not. But, you know, I didn't really want to do a book that was just talking to everyone that, you know, had some kind of issue with Lou. So, you know, what he would have made of it, I mean, I felt like I wrote the kind of book I felt he deserved. You know, Lou saw himself as a writer finally. And I have a PhD in literature. I tried to write the kind of book that would have been written about the writers that Lou admired and I admired, and, you know, a great sort of literary biography, really. I mean, almost more than a musical biography. And I felt like I got that. So from that standpoint, I feel like I certainly, you know, did him justice. Whether or not you know, it's extremely doubtful to me that he would have been able to recognize it.
It's certainly true that Lou wouldn't have emotionally have liked to have his entire life dissected, etc. It is also true that he completely expected it, and I fear had there not been a rush to do biographies, he would have been surprised and offended. We always talked about the autobiography that I wanted him to do. He rejected it because something about it would stop his work, and he was still very much engaged in his work. It took me many years to understand this. His work, there's a thing he knew and understood, that if you put something in the way of that creative work, you could squelch the gift and lose it. And he tried to convey that. So there is this type of examination that's required to do an autobiographical work that would be in direct contravention to what he needed to do for his ongoing work. So I understand it a little better now. When Anthony brought up the Rachel story, I want to let everyone know that I've come to a point where I'm participating in something that people will find out about soon, but which those of us who knew Rachel, and I am one of the persons who knew Rachel, we're working toward doing something that I think is wonderful and appropriate for the legacy. That's an aside. I can't say more about it, but it's supposed to be in development and happening soon. I also took upon myself, when Lou died, to investigate what happened to Rachel. I personally have been in touch with a family member, and through my work, researching, you know, sharing that information with the family, and I'm ready to sort of write about it and tell that story. So that process began back then. I like to say to everyone that the Coney Island Baby album, of course, is fantastic and wonderful. And I like to draw fans' attention to Street Hassle, which I think is just interesting in the way you have the song Street Hassle, which of course is this wonderful, emotional, coarse and brutal story, and yet entwined in there is a wonderful goodbye to Rachel. On the same album, you have a wonderful song called Wait, which is the first song that Lou wrote for me. And it talks about a situation with his relationship with Rachel, his relationship with me. And it's the first hint that, of the change that's going to become apparent to everyone back 1978, 79. So it's something that I wanted to bring up. It's a deep story. It's a complicated story. And I believe it does need to be told. But those of us who care deeply really wanted to tell it in the right way and keep it in context and not just make it, sort of fodder for gossip. So that is one of the reasons why I've been discreet about it for all these years. And I just wanted to make that point because a little more will be known about this matter. And like I said, it's in development.
Yeah, that's really important. I'm glad you brought it up. Now we could talk about magic and loss with the symbols and that Anthony brought up in the book. And why I want to tie this in is because the graphics go so well with the songs, because the symbols are related to the songs.
I will say the content of Magic and Loss was so intense, and a loss is very personal. The losses, let me say, the losses that inspired the work, very personal. And I believe a great artist like Lou, for the first time confronting the concept of mortality, and of course his own mortality becoming like a premonition. There were other pieces of parts of his work where it also served as premonition, but Magic and Loss much more directly. And I believe that it took great care to try to visually depict some of the themes that he was touching on. And of course, in October 2013, when he passed, all of these just gained so much more in importance. And it was something that I was very happy that we worked together on, such that when it came time to design the stage set, which thankfully, as in the other interview, I go on about that a bit, very grateful to Lou that he respected my desire to participate in that. He admired it. He knew that I wouldn't just throw something in, just to, I don't know, get the credit. And Spencer and Judith, you both understood it right away. And one of the pieces that I know we're all very proud of is the box set that was the metal box for Magic and Loss, that I think was truly a beautiful piece and incorporated these symbols, incorporated the thinking of particularly cremation and passing through fire. And if you'll remember the funny story about the burnt disc being so convincing that people tried to return it to the store and they wanted an undamaged disc. So that is one of our chuckles that we have over that. But Judith painstakingly assisted me to realize the imagery in the stage set, which I believe in the other interview we'll see some clips that Patrick wonderfully found and inserted so that people could see what the set design incorporated into the show nicely.
And I believe that having painted the symbols for stage on glass, the album itself probably impacted on my life as well. May have made it shorter.
Yikes.
But yeah, it was a labor of love, really, and certainly seeing those images blown up on stage really was I can't, of course it was, like I was quelling inside, shall we say.
And the way you painted them on the glass slides, and as the tour went on, the decay of each image, which would happen because these were actual paintings on slides,
Right.
and then had to be moved and stored, and then
Oh my God.
go to the next city, put it all up again. And so of course there was some natural decay that was happening to the slides. So by the end, it was a visual, a complete visual statement of everything he was talking about.
And the next thing I want to talk about is Between Thought and Expression, which Anthony beautifully describes. The book cover, how wonderful the book cover was with a Matt Mulholland photograph and the gold and black. That was something that was very, for an author to describe that, you must have been very passionate about it.
I was moved by it, and I also, I felt, when I said before that I felt like Lou saw himself ultimately as a writer. And I think that book was an example of that. And that was much more the kind of thing that you would see, as the cover of a book of poems or something along those. It was very literary. And I think, Lou intentionally framed it that way, wanted to present it that way. And I think it was very meaningful to him to do that. And, when he was giving readings from it, I think that having the opportunity to speak to people, about his lyrics. I remember Bill Bentley telling me a story of being at a reading, maybe Sylvia was there too, where Lou was crying backstage because he was so moved by, just people speaking to him very specifically about his words. And I think, finally, Lou would tell anybody he met that, he had an honors degree in English from Syracuse, and I think that element of his life was very significant to him.
Anthony brought up the educational aspect. I think it is true. But for Lou, let's remember, it's much more than just, I'm an English major at Syracuse University. It was really all very much keyed to Delmore Schwartz. So there are many English majors from Syracuse University. There is only one who developed the relationship with one of the greatest American poets, and that was Lou. And I think this is a good time to mention that there will be for the first time, and I believe 85 years, there's the collected works of Delmore Schwartz coming out in the winter of this year.
I want to bring Richard Barone in. And Rich, you put together at South by Southwest a Lou Reed song tribute with Alexandro Escovedo.
Before we jump into that, I really want to just say what I'm so happy to be hearing Sylvia and Anthony talk about these various aspects of Lou Reed's life, because he's always been such an inspiration to me. I didn't just jump in and do a tribute to Lou for the hell of it. I was a lifelong fan. And then I met him really when I got off the train from Florida and moved to New York. I met Lou within the first week at a guitar shop, and we met, and he helped me pick out a guitar actually that I used in the bongos, etc.
Wow.
And through Sylvia, I was able to kind of reconnect with Lou years later when the bongos were signed. Really, not that many years later, a few years later, when the bongos signed to RCA Records, and Lou was also at RCA. And I think, as I recall, Sylvia, I think, brought home a copy of the first bongos record to Lou, and he seemed to like it. And we started a new an actual friendship at that point. So yes, in 20, I guess it was early 2014, Alejandro Escovedo and I called Alejandro because he was from Austin, Texas, for one thing. And I knew that together we could put together something very, very special at South by Southwest. And that was a thrill because I knew all the music. I loved all the songs. And it was wonderful to get different artists to interpret them in a 3 or 4 hour concert, maybe more than that, maybe 5 hour concert. It was quite a big show. And I think it felt good to be part of that because, like I said, I was inspired by Lou through my whole life, really.
And you've been along with Anthony on his book tour, the 92Y event. I remember being at, we were all at, that was a beautiful book signing event. Tell us about that, Rich, because I think
That was a great show.
Suzanne Vega played there. Is that
Suzanne
right?
Vega and I, we did some songs. I believe Suzanne did a song from Berlin. We did some things together. Yeah, we all had some really nice musical moments in that event. And Anthony's book is a very special, and he used the word literary, and it's true. It's a very literary biography that I think Lou would have ultimately liked, even though I know everything that Anthony said is correct about the ideas of things maybe in his life that he may not have wanted so analyzed or revealed. Still, it's a great literary piece of work. So it's a beautiful book that Lou would certainly have appreciated, I think.
Yeah.
And so to bring it to the stage at the 92nd Street Y, and we did other events together. That was always a great experience for me to be part of.
I'll give a little plug here to your Carnegie Hall event, which Anthony is going to be part of also. Tell us about that coming up.
Well, my book, Music and Revolution, is really about Greenwich Village in the 1960s, of course, and what led to it, why it's Greenwich Village in the 1960s. But I wanted to make sure in it to cover the Velvet Underground as a very important aspect of that scene that's not always appreciated as part of the Greenwich Village music scene. We often think of the more folky bands, or the Love and Spoonful, Bob Dylan, acoustic acts. We don't really think of the Velvet Underground as being part of that scene, but without them, it would have been very different, I feel. And I think they contributed so much to it. So it was a thrill to me to be able to work that into the story in the book and also into the concert that we're working on now for Carnegie Hall.
Quite a lineup.
Yeah, it is a very good lineup. And the other thing I wanted to mention too is Lou's connection with the art scene, the avant-garde cinema, underground cinema. That connection had repercussions in the village with other artists, Eric Anderson, others. I think the fact that Lou kind of helped made the strongest connection between the avant-garde film world, the art world with Warhol, that's a very important part of the story.
There was certainly a kind of overlap. I mean, even though they didn't know each other back in the day. In fact, they met at Andy Warhol's funeral, Eric Anderson and Sylvia Reed. But they came to become close friends, and talked about those eras. And Eric Anderson, though a kind of quote unquote folky at the time, was in a Warhol film and was part of that world. And but like Lou said, we were in the same place. We were just riding different subway lines. And that's really true. I was happy to spend a Sunday actually in the studio with Eric and Lou, and they recorded some tracks for Eric, one of Eric's albums. And these are two people from that same world that Richard is writing about who eventually became very close, and those connections that Richard described are very true and very apt.
I'd like to jump in and say that I very much appreciate, speaking to Richard about music history. It's so eye-opening and remarkable when you can tie these threads together, and that's what I love about the historical nature of understanding where things come from. I think Lou really was very interested in that, and that is why he, when he talked about his own personal record collection of the R&B that he loved and the soul records that he loved, he would tell you, remember this piece came from this particular B-side of this particular single that that meant the world to him. And I think someone on a fan page recently it was nice that the younger people are now becoming aware that Lou is referencing quite a few of these lyrics in some of the music. So I wanted to say that I think it's so important what Richard Barone's book is about. And I did want to guide a little bit toward Anthony. I think one of the great aspects of what Anthony did was to be the first true writer to open up the subject matter. I note that there were many books before by people, who basically want let me tell you a few grotesque stories about this artist, So often our attention gets sucked in by that sort of thing. And Lou gave them a lot of material, let's be honest. But I think for the first truly literary look at the life, where you're doing the work of a true biographer, and I think that title does go to Anthony. Another aspect of it was that his personal kindness helped Lou's sister deal with what was probably the most traumatic and problematic issues that she had to deal with, is having been a person who was once very close with the family. I know personally how much she had to say and how much she needed to tell her story from her point of view. And Anthony, I believe, had much to do with helping her realize that. So I think that's something that should be noted. I think she came to a place where her version of it is certainly should be, she has the right to have her version of it. And Lou had, his version. And so I think I needed to say that. So it's sort of a thank you to Anthony, because I care very much about the family, and I worked quite hard during our marriage to sort of bring the family together.
It's very kind of you to say that. I have to say that one of the things that struck me, maybe the first, revelation, my own revelation, in terms of working on the biography, was the complexity of Lou's family relationship, as opposed to what he often said about it in interviews and things like that.
Mm.
And the complexity of his relationship with his father, for example. I mean, look, fathers and sons, it's like mothers and daughters, and maybe just all children and all parents. These are deep and complicated relationships. But Lou, on the one hand, felt how overbearing they were, but there's that dedication on between thought and expression, to his parents. That I wanted to try to get at some of the nuance there. I think that maybe is, it's sort of where I go. I think personally, I tend to think probably, I tell my students this all the time. Probably the most typical thing you're going to hear me say is, "It's more complicated." And but most things are, And so, I mean, the fact that hearing Sylvia say that is actually deeply meaningful to me, because I really wanted to convey some. I appreciate her.
They say in baseball, there's a perfect game. In publishing, there's a perfect book. This is a perfect book in my life.
Well, I could go through it. I mean, it's like when, I always talk about, when you talk to musicians about, one of the problems of talking to musicians, especially when they first get out of the studio, and you're talking to them about their album, and you just heard it. Maybe you haven't heard any music from them in a while, and you're excited. And they'll just begin like, "Oh God, there's this bass part on this track and this other the other track," and all they can feel are the mistakes. I'm kind of over that as far as my book is concerned, but I certainly know where the issues are. the book is long, and there are things I sort of felt like maybe I could push this further, and maybe I could have gotten something else. Maybe there was more to say here, but um, I uh, whenever I have to dip into it for something, I find it pretty satisfying, I have to say. I mean, I always think about this time with my daughter when she was, how old was she? She was maybe like 10 or 12. She came into my bedroom, and I was looking through the book to, fact check something or just read up on a part of Lou's life that I was interested in. And she just said, "So, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm reading my Lou Reed biography." She just goes, I think it rewards people's time. I think, people who care about Lou, will find satisfactions, and it's a version of a life, that, and it was a long, incredibly accomplished, very, very complex life. And, this is a take on it. I'm very interested in this project that, obviously that, Sylvia was just alluding to.
Mm.
And, to anything else that comes out about Lou, I feel there's obviously more to add and more to say, but I certainly did the best I could.
I always say to Judith or Patrick, when I'm doing a show, we hope that the show brings out who these people are and where they're coming from. And your book brings out Lou. I mean, really brings out, if someone does not know Lou Reed, when you read your book, they'll know him at the end of the book.
It's also written with a lot of respect and love and understanding of Lou Reed.
Yeah.
When you read biographies of people, you rarely get that, really, I think. You really rarely get that kind of personal investment in the person and their art. And with Anthony's book, I really feel like I always feel with every word a respect for Lou's work, and an understanding that it's his work, his life and music are so connected.
Yeah.
Maybe more than most artists. Lou laid it on the line with his songs, and it's all there. Like even the family issues, it really all comes through in his lyrics.
Mm.
And Anthony's book has an understanding of that without having to hammer that constantly. It's an understanding that that's what's happening, and there's a lot of respect and love in that book.
Yeah.
When you bring up the idea of respect, I have to say, I felt that very deeply, and I felt it, particularly when Lou was alive. I mean, obviously, if you're around someone, and I had the opportunity to be around Lou a fair amount, but it was never lost on me who he was, even at those moments that were personal. I would occasionally just be thinking, God, that's Lou Reed. He wrote those songs. That time, the first time you heard that Velvet Underground record, that's the guy. And you couldn't really say that to him. I mean, Michael Dorff, the guy from
City Winery.
Yeah, City Winery, was telling me like that he was with Lou one time, and he was drinking some wine, and just finally just said to Lou, Lou liked him, and they were buddies, but like he finally just said to Lou, like, can you tell me about the Velvet Underground? What was that like? And Lou just said, "Oh, Michael." There's certain inevitability of that coming up, and Lou just, I mean, he was used to it, but I think that idea that Lou was always very forward-looking. I think, and, he wasn't one to just kind of wander, through the midst of time back to the past and relive the glory days. That, and so he understood where that was coming from. But it was a story.
He certainly examined and wrote things into his work. I'm friends with Betty, his first wife. She's a remarkable person. She wrote a book. And I'm always amazed because the, uh, the way when I first met him, the very obvious, it was completely clear to me that he was taking in everything and the way a writer does. And you could almost, I often say, you could almost see the writing happening as he's examining, and when he chooses to examine a subject, it's a very particular kind of attention. And it can be very seductive to be examined in that way and questioned. If he's fascinated by something, he's asking you a lot of questions. And sure enough, there, album by album, there it comes. As some of the answers are there, some of the stories are there. And I think for Betty and I, we had two different experiences of that, because in her era, he is someone who is about to do Transformer and Berlin, which I think is obviously astonishing work, wonderful work. And in my case, of course, he's someone who has already done it. And then he's in the process right away of, as I said, Street Hassle, which of course is one of his masterpieces. And his ability to sort of take the material he needs from someone. And he did that, obviously, as I said, from Street Hassle to Legendary Hearts right through. And then, of course, he promised me later he would never write the Divorce album, which if anyone has listened to 2 or 3 of the tracks on Ecstasy, I'm sure I beg to differ. But, at least I knew what I was in for. I knew he was a tremendous writer. I knew he was a genius. So it wasn't anything I was surprised by. And in what I'm writing, I hope to make those things clear, that I was already really engaged in his work when in our very first time that we were getting to know each other. And I think that is a part of my story with him that has been missing. So, as I said, I'm trying to share it now and share with some of the more complicated aspects also of how we began and et cetera. But that's something that I like to give credit to all the writers. Betty had something to say, and certainly, she talked about a time that I was fascinated with, because I think Berlin is, of course, one of his great masterpieces. And there were certain aspects in the lyrics that related to, strangely enough, related to my life. I lived in Berlin when I was in junior high school. So I was one of those people going, how did you know? You brought Berlin to life. And he's like, oh, I've never been there. I hadn't been there at the time that I wrote this album. And it was one of the amusing issues that, he had written this, and yet Berlin was a state of mind, a state of heart. And I related to it because of the fact that I drew certain conclusions from having lived there and having experienced some of what it was to be in the divided city.
I want to bring up, before we leave, Anthony, about Mick Rock, who's a very close friend of me and Judith, and I designed with, and was very close with Lou, which you know. And I remember going down to John Varvatos.
Very close friend of Richard Barone's. Also.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Richard.
One of my best friends.
Yeah. And I remember going to John Varvatos, Anthony, when the book signing, and I shook Lou's hand, and he was very weak. I could feel his hand very weak, but I just wanted to thank him for my life with him, what we did with Sylvia and so forth. And you wrote about it in the book, I believe, right? About that book signing?
Yeah. Yeah. That book, when Lou was not in great shape at that point. And was kind of dying, I suppose. While he was in the hospital, Mick Rock sent him some proofs of the book, and included in the proofs was the cover with the price on it. And Lou just emailed Mick and just said, "Oh, very nice work," and then it break. Nice price too.
That's right. That's right.
And, Mick was somebody. He went on the ride with Lou. From back in the days with David Bowie. One of the things that I'm going to be, I don't know if boastful is the word, but one of the things that Mick Rock said about David Bowie was that Bowie liked the way Mick photographed him, and he once said about it, because Mick sees me the way I see myself. And I feel that while he was alive, one of the reasons Lou liked me is that when I wrote about him, I think he saw himself in there. I think he felt that.
Yeah.
So Mick was great. He did a wonderful interview for the book. To say that Mick knows where the bodies are buried. Not that he ever gave it up during his life, and now I don't think anybody will ever know some of the things that Mick knows.
Yeah, that's true.
Photographed.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, he was informed and gracious and smart, and was just a valuable voice in the book, and a really nice person. I have to say, someone we'll all miss.
Thank you. By the way, thank you all for being on, Richard. And Richard has this wonderful book, Music Plus Revolution, which everybody should buy. And along with Anthony's book, Lou Reed A Life, and even the Clive Davis book, which is incredible. And Sylvia, we wish you very luck with your book.
Thank
And
you.
we hope to have you on when that book is done, right? So this was a really great show and great information and a learning tool show. And thank you all for being on and looking forward.
It was such a great pleasure.
Thank you, Spencer. Thank you very much.
Oh, quite welcome.
Happy
You're my
to be
buddies,
here.
like a family here. You know what I mean? It's like we're a music family here.